The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. My father had collapsed at work. Heart attack. The ambulance was already on its way to the hospital. I remember staring at my phone screen, my hands shaking, thinking about the one decision that would turn this medical emergency into a complete financial catastrophe. We had an emergency fund, 6 months of expenses, just like every financial expert recommends. $32,000 sitting in a savings account, untouched, waiting for exactly this kind of moment. We thought we were prepared. We thought we had done everything right. We were catastrophically wrong. What happened over the next 8 months didn't just drain our savings. It destroyed my family's financial stability for years. And the worst part? The mistake we made is one that millions of families are making right now, following the same conventional advice that led us straight into financial ruin. If you're watching this video, you probably have an emergency fund or you're building one, and there's a very good chance you're making the exact same mistake we did. Before this video ends, I'm going to show you why the traditional emergency fund advice is fundamentally broken and what you need to do differently before it's too late. But first, if you find value in this kind of real-world financial truth, the kind that comes from painful experience rather than textbook theory, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel. This might be the most important financial video you watch this year. Now let me tell you exactly how everything fell apart. My father survived the heart attack, but he couldn't return to work. The doctor said he needed at least 6 months of recovery, maybe more. No work meant no income. He was self-employed, so there was no paid leave, no disability insurance through an employer, just bills that kept coming and money that stopped flowing. This was exactly what the emergency fund was for. We had $32,000. My parents' monthly expenses were around $5,300. Simple math, we had 6 months covered. We'd be fine until Dad could work again. Except that's not how emergencies actually work. The first blow came within 2 weeks. The medical bills started arriving. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket maximum was $8,500. Then there were the medications, $340 per month for the new prescriptions. The cardiac rehab program that insurance only partially covered. The special diet that cost significantly more than their normal grocery budget. But we still felt okay. We had the emergency fund. That's what it was there for. The second blow hit in month 2. My mother had been the secondary income in the household, working part-time at a local business. When she had to cut her hours to take care of my father and drive him to appointments, her income dropped by 60%. We hadn't counted on that. The emergency fund was supposed to cover 6 months of expenses, not 6 months of expenses plus a massive reduction in income. The third blow was the one that really exposed our mistake. My father's business, a small consulting practice he'd built over 15 years, started losing clients. When you disappear for months in that kind of work, clients don't wait. They find someone else. Within 3 months, 40% of his client base had moved on. This meant that even when he could return to work, his income wouldn't just resume at the previous level. It would take months, maybe years, to rebuild what he'd lost. By month 4, the emergency fund was gone, all $32,000, evaporated, and the emergency wasn't over, not even close. Here's what nobody tells you about emergency funds. The standard advice is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how real emergencies actually unfold. Every financial expert says the same thing. Save 3 to 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account. Some say 3 months, some say 12, but they all focus on the same metric, months of expenses. This is the mistake that destroyed us. Real emergencies don't come with calculators. They don't politely limit themselves to your current expense level. They don't arrive solo. They bring friends. When my father had his heart attack, we didn't just lose his income. We simultaneously incurred massive, unexpected medical expenses, lost my mother's part-time income, watched my father's future earning potential evaporate, faced increased monthly costs for medications and medical care, dealt with the psychological stress that led to poor financial decisions. The emergency fund that was supposed to cover 6 months lasted less than 4, and when it ran out, we had no plan B. We had fallen into the trap that ensnares millions. We had built an emergency fund that was theoretically adequate but practically useless. The traditional advice treats emergencies like they're predictable, isolated events. Save enough to cover your bills for a few months, and you'll be fine when something goes wrong. But that's not how life works. Emergencies cascade, they compound, they multiply. And if your emergency fund is built on the assumption that emergencies are neat and tidy, you're building a financial house of cards. Month 5 was when things got truly desperate. The emergency fund was gone. My father still couldn't work full time. My mother was exhausted from caregiving and could barely maintain her reduced hours. The bills hadn't stopped coming. This is where we made the second massive mistake, the one that turned a bad situation into a generational financial disaster. We started using credit cards. It made sense at the time. My father would be back to work soon. We just needed to bridge a few more months. We'd pay it all back when income resumed. Temporary problem, temporary solution. Except it wasn't temporary. The credit card debt started at $5,000, then $10,000, then $18,000. The interest charges alone were eating $400 a month, money that could have gone to actual expenses, but instead disappeared into the financial void of consumer debt. When my father finally returned to work in month 7, he was returning to a business that had been decimated. His income was less than half of what it had been before, and now we had credit card debt, ongoing medical expenses, and a family that had burned through every financial buffer we'd spent years building. The emergency fund mistake had created a debt trap, and the debt trap was creating a cycle we couldn't escape. Within a year, my parents had to sell their house, the home they'd lived in for 20 years, where they'd raised their children, where they'd planned to retire. Gone. They moved into a small apartment, downsized their entire lives, and spent the next 5 years digging out of the hole that single emergency had created. All because we thought we were prepared, all because we had followed the conventional wisdom about emergency funds. After watching my family's finances implode, I spent years studying what went wrong. I talked to financial planners, read research on household financial resilience, and interviewed dozens of families who had been through similar experiences. What I discovered is that the traditional emergency fund model has 3 fatal flaws. Flaw number 1. It assumes emergencies are static. The 6 months of expenses formula assumes your expenses stay the same during the emergency. But emergencies almost always increase expenses while simultaneously decreasing income. Medical emergencies come with medical bills. Job loss often requires relocation or retraining costs. Car accidents mean rental cars and increased insurance premiums. Your emergency fund needs to account for the fact that emergencies make everything more expensive, not less. Flaw number 2. It ignores cascade effects. Emergencies don't happen in isolation. They trigger secondary and tertiary problems. A health crisis leads to lost work, which leads to lost clients, which leads to long-term income reduction, which leads to stress, which leads to poor decisions. The emergency fund that covers the initial crisis does nothing for the cascade that follows. You need a financial structure that can absorb multiple simultaneous shocks, not just one. Flaw number 3. It provides no recovery capital. This is the most devastating flaw of all. Even if your emergency fund successfully carries you through the immediate crisis, it leaves you with nothing for the recovery phase. When my father returned to work, he needed marketing money to rebuild his client base. He needed capital to retool his business for his new physical limitations. He needed runway to survive while his income slowly returned to normal levels. The emergency fund was gone. There was no recovery capital. So instead of rebuilding, he struggled. Instead of investing in getting back to full strength, he limped along at reduced capacity for years. An emergency fund that gets you through the crisis but leaves you unable to recover isn't a safety net. It's a slower way to fail. So what's the solution? How do you build an emergency fund that can actually handle real-world emergencies instead of the sanitized textbook version? You need to stop thinking about emergency funds as a single savings account and start thinking about them as a multi-layered financial defense system. Layer 1. The Immediate Response Fund, $2,000–$5,000. This is liquid cash for immediate emergencies, car breaks down, medical copay, unexpected travel. This money sits in a checking account or high-yield savings account where you can access it instantly. This isn't your main emergency fund. This is the pressure release valve that keeps small emergencies from becoming credit card debt. Layer 2, the core emergency fund, 6 to 12 months of increased expenses. Notice I said increased expenses, not current expenses. Calculate what your monthly spending would be if you faced a major emergency and expenses went up by 30–50%. This money should be in a high-yield savings account, but here's the crucial part. This fund needs to be big enough to handle elevated costs, not just normal costs. If your current expenses are $4,000 per month, plan for $6,000. If there's $6,000, plan for $9,000. Yes, this is a bigger number than traditional advice suggests. That's because traditional advice doesn't work. Layer 3, the recovery fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses. This is the layer that doesn't exist in conventional emergency fund advice, and it's the layer we desperately needed. The recovery fund sits separately from your emergency fund. It's money you don't touch during the crisis itself. It's specifically designated for rebuilding after the emergency passes. Medical crisis? The recovery fund helps pay for rehabilitation, career retraining, or business rebuilding. Job loss? The recovery fund finances your job search, relocation, or business launch. Disaster? The recovery fund covers the transition period while you get back on your feet. This fund prevents the devastating scenario my family faced, surviving the emergency only to find ourselves too financially depleted to actually recover. Layer 4, the insurance layer. This isn't cash, but it's part of your emergency defense system. Disability insurance, life insurance, umbrella liability coverage, health insurance with reasonable deductibles. Insurance converts certain catastrophic risks into predictable monthly costs. It's the difference between a $500,000 crisis and a $10,000 crisis. Most people think they can't afford insurance, but after watching what happened to my family, I can tell you, you can't afford not to have it. I know what you're thinking. This sounds like I need $50,000 in emergency savings. I can barely save $1,000. This is impossible. You're right that it's a lot, but it's not impossible, and it's far more achievable than you think if you approach it strategically. Start with Layer 1. Get that $2,000, $5,000 immediate response fund built first. This is your foundation. Every emergency fund journey starts here. Cut expenses, sell stuff you don't need, work extra hours, whatever it takes to get this layer in place within 6 months. Build Layer 2 and Layer 3 simultaneously. Don't wait until you have a full 6-month emergency fund to start building your recovery fund. Split your savings, 70% to the core emergency fund, 30% to the recovery fund. This keeps both growing together and ensures you're building comprehensive coverage from the beginning. Automate everything. Set up automatic transfers the day after your paycheck hits. You can't spend what you don't see. Even $100 per paycheck becomes $2,400 per year. In 5 years, that's $12,000 plus interest. Use windfalls strategically. Tax refund, bonus, inheritance, gift money. These don't go to lifestyle upgrades. They go straight into layers 2 and 3 until those are fully funded. Increase your savings rate as your income grows. Got a raise? Increase your emergency fund contribution by the same percentage. Your lifestyle doesn't need to inflate with every income increase. This isn't fast. Building a proper multi-layer emergency fund might take 3 to 5 years. But you know what takes longer? Recovering from a financial catastrophe because you had an inadequate emergency fund. That took my family nearly a decade. Here's the hard truth about why most people never build adequate emergency funds. It's psychologically painful to have money sitting there doing nothing. You'll watch your savings account grow and think, I could use this for a down payment on a house. I could invest this in the market. I could take that trip I've been dreaming about. The opportunity cost feels massive. The money feels wasted. This is the psychological trap that keeps people vulnerable. We're wired to value immediate tangible benefits over distant uncertain protection. A vacation today feels better than insurance against a crisis that might never come, until the crisis comes. Then suddenly, that money isn't doing nothing. It's doing everything. My parents felt this pain too. They had built that $32,000 over 7 years. There were moments they considered using it for other things: home improvements, a better car, investments that could have grown faster than a savings account. They resisted those temptations and kept the emergency fund intact. And when the emergency hit, they were grateful they had it. They just wished they'd made it bigger and structured it better. The psychological work of building and maintaining an emergency fund is choosing long-term security over short-term satisfaction. It's choosing boring and safe over exciting and risky. It's choosing invisible protection over visible progress. Our culture doesn't celebrate this choice. Social media doesn't showcase the person with a fully funded emergency fund. It showcases the person with the new car or the exotic vacation. But that person with the emergency fund will be standing when the storms come. The person chasing lifestyle inflation will be swept away. My father is 67 now. He's still working, though he'd planned to retire at 65. The financial damage from that emergency and the inadequate preparation for it cost him years of his life and peace of mind he'll never get back. He tells me now that if he could go back, he wouldn't just build a bigger emergency fund. He would build it differently. Multiple layers, recovery capital, a system designed for real emergencies, not theoretical ones. You're watching this video, which means you still have time to make that choice. You can follow the conventional advice, save 3 to 6 months of expenses and hope that's enough. Or you can learn from our mistake and build a real financial defense system. The emergency is coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not this year. But it's coming. The only question is whether you'll be truly prepared when it does. That phone call at 2:47 a.m. changed everything for my family. The emergency fund we had wasn't enough to protect us from what followed. Don't let the same thing happen to you. Build your immediate response fund. Build your core emergency fund with elevated expenses in mind. Build your recovery fund. Get proper insurance. Create a system that can handle real emergencies, not just the sanitized version financial gurus talk about. Because when that crisis comes, and it will come, you don't want to be like us, watching your financial stability crumble despite doing what everyone told you was enough. You want to be the family that not only survives the emergency, but comes out the other side ready to rebuild and thrive. That's the difference between having an emergency fund and having an emergency defense system. Make the right choice while you still can.